Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In a new series of interviews, which seems to be a thing that I'm doing nowadays, I'm joined by another role-playing game designer and good friend of mine, James Gantry of Feral Games. So, James, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, no, thanks for sort of inviting me after I prompted you to. It's very good of you. And it's always nice to chat to you anyway. And I'm not that I get the chance very often and stuff. With you being a foreigner and that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But no, thanks for having me. It's yeah. So just to introduce myself. I'm Jay. I'm the director of Feral Gamers Inc. and the head person and the writer, the layout person, everything. Basically, I'm the person. I am Feral Gamers Inc. So
Excellent. So, yeah, so you and I kind of got our start around the same time, I think 2016, 2017. So that's a good point of departure. Maybe just tell me a little bit about the start of Feral Gamers, who was involved, and sort of how the whole thing came about.
okay, right. So it's always just been me involved. Really, it's never really. I mean, I've got the occasional freelancers in to do the artwork and do the writing and stuff of some things, but they're generally kind of people who do freelancing of particular parts, mainly backgrounds and stuff. But generally speaking, it's always been me. But yeah, I started kind of doing stuff in 2016. I think the first thing we published was Delve, first edition, which was really bad. The game was all right. The system was pretty good, but the actual layout and everything was terrible. It wasn't really a PDF. I didn't really know what I was doing, to be perfectly honest with you. And then we released the Zombie Squad, and then we released another game which I can't remember. But they're all free and they're all terrible. But it went really well. People downloaded them. There was no bad words against them. They all had quite high scores, I guess. Stars on the drive-through, and that kind of prompted me to do more, really. And that's kind of where I started. The reason I started is because I've been working in the fair trade industry. I used to be working in fair trade with countries like Africa and stuff and India, getting people who lived in some of the sort of worst parts of these countries and getting them to make money from making stuff, right? So that's kind of what my job was. But after 2008 and everything else, everything kind of went downhill a little bit, and everything was hit by the problems that we had with banking and all that sort of stuff, the economy and all that collapsing. So I got made redundant. At which point I also became homeless. And I was homeless for quite a while. I lived in France for a little bit, and then I ended up back in England again with my current my wife, who was then my partner and stuff. And at that point, I'd been homeless almost 3 years, and I was like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. Really, I don't want to work for anybody else anymore. I'm sick of being, at the whims of some other person who just doesn't care and just drop me off whenever they want and make me redundant. And it just got a bit to a point where you start thinking, I've got this opportunity now, I've got this situation where I can start afresh. And what do I want to do rather than what should I do? So I thought, well, what I'm going to do is what I want to do, and that's to write. And what do I know? And I thought role-playing games. I've been doing them since I was 14. I've always done homebrew stuff. So I thought, give it a go. And that's where I did Delve and Zombie Squad and everything else. And that's how it all started, basically.
Wow, that's a hell of a story. I didn't realize that you'd gotten into it in such a sort of tumultuous way. But yeah, I think that's...
Yeah, it was a bit...
quite hectic.
It's a bit of a crazy one, actually.
Wow,
I don't think many people... Yeah.
Oh, you heard it here first, I suppose.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's great. No, wow, that's fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about. So you decided, okay, you want to do role playing games, and you said you'd obviously been playing and reading them from when you were sort of early teens. So your first design, you say, was the original edition of Delve. So tell me a little bit about what inspired that and how you sort of went about doing that. I know that there's a second edition that came later that obviously improved the layout and did a whole bunch of different things. But tell me just a little bit about how that initial sort of idea came about and was brought to fruition.
Well, I've always been a role player, and I've always wanted to do something a little bit different for general role playing games. I mean, I've never been a big D&D player. My first role playing game was Dungeons and Trolls and RuneQuest, and I didn't actually even start playing D&D. I played it maybe once during the third edition phase. And I think I played it once with my geography teacher at school when he ran a second edition game, right? And I played it once with that. So that's really 2 times I ever played D&D, up until recently where I played a bit more 5th edition. But generally speaking, I've been playing other games, RuneQuest, Rollmaster, all these other things, Call of Cthulhu. And I was very drawn towards the D100 system because of that, really. Because this is where I started, I guess. It's nostalgia more than anything else. But no, I kind of want to do something. When I was thinking about doing a role-playing game, I kind of thought, well, I want to do something a little bit different. But I also don't want to overdo it. You know, I don't want to run before I can walk, if you like. But I want to do something that's going to kind of stand out a little bit. And so I knew I wanted to do a fantasy role-playing game because they're always popular and it's a good way to start, you know, because you can throw a lot of things into fantasy and there's an awful lot of stuff you can pull from, right? So I thought, well, I'll do fantasy and I want to do something different. So I was thinking about how the mechanics would work. And it was mainly combat, because combat's always a big feature of most role-playing games. So I want to do a combat where you didn't ever attack. You never roll to attack. You only ever roll to defend. Because if you're facing someone, they're facing you and you're facing them, it's going to be indeed with the fact that you can be standing right in front of somebody. They'll throw a massive axe at you and they'll still miss, even though you're standing right there, right? Now, however useless you are, if you're standing right in front of somebody with a baseball bat, you're going to hit them, right? You can't miss them unless, of course, they're extremely good at dodging, right? So I thought if I could do a game that didn't actually have any rolls to attack, you never roll to attack, you only ever roll to defend. You always hit, right? It's up to you to stop that person from hitting you, favor blocking or parrying or dodging. And so that's how Delve came about, was that it was based on that mechanic. And I loved that mechanic. I thought it was awesome. A lot of people didn't like it because I thought it was weird. But because I think a lot of people expected to attack rolls and then defense rolls, people didn't like the fact you didn't attack. But to me, it just made sense.
It's unusual because to me, I think there's a lot more emotion riding on whether you manage to evade something than whether you manage to clobber someone. I think that, when you play
hitting someone though.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But there's also that rush of sort of surviving, and when your life is on the line, when you're rolling dice, I think it makes a lot more sense that wow, my character surviving is on this roll. That's a lot more exciting than me doing some damage to this troll or whatever. Interesting. Okay, well that kind of describes a little bit about your first project, and then you had a few others. And what I've got here is just a little bit of a list of some of your sort of more notable projects. And I'd suggest that people obviously go onto your Drive-Thru RPG and go through it and have a look, because there's so much. But I want to talk. Let's talk firstly about probably one of your most popular products, which is this one here, Ghost Ops. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of this project, and then I want to talk a lot about sort of the community that's kind of sprung up around it, which I think is so cool. But tell me a little bit about Ghost Ops. Where does it come from, and what inspired it?
Okay, right. So basically, I was playing Ghost Recon, and it was Wildlands, and I was sitting there just playing it. I've played a lot of the Ghost Recon stuff, never really given it much thought. Rainbow Six and all the Rainbow stuff, and I hadn't really given it any thought really beyond just playing it and killing things and stuff as you do. But I was sitting there thinking, hold on a second, right? This is actually a role-playing game, right? There's 4 people, right? Each one have their own particular, skills, and they're all going after the same basic, target, and all working together. And, they all rely upon each other to get the job done. This would make an awesome role-playing game. Why hasn't anybody made this into a role-playing game, right? So when I gave it some more thought, I thought, well, and I basically looked everywhere to see if there was a role-playing game. And there had been some stuff in the past, things done by Palladium and so forth, but none of it had gone anywhere, and it had all been done in the 80s and then sort of forgotten about, really. And I thought, well, maybe it's time to do so, because, you think about it, how many people play Ghost Recon, how many people play Call of Duty? There's millions, right? And some of those have got role players, all the millions of people who play it. So I thought, well, there's an audience. There's got to be an audience there for it, because why wouldn't you want to take a thing you're playing on screen on your own, on your sofa in your pants, right? Why wouldn't you want to take that to the gaming table, play with friends, right? In a group where you could all have the same goal. And plus it's got a really good premise. There's no kind of backstabbing thief for this. There's no, evil wizard who's going to steal everything and bugger off. Everybody's working towards the same goal, and it's all about teammanship and camaraderie and no one's left behind and all this sort of stuff, right? And it's also got that thrilling kind of action bit, that people love from action movies and stuff and all that sort of thing. So I thought, well, then maybe we should do a game. I'll do a game on it. And so that's what happened. That's where it came from. The fact I looked at it and thought it was one of those things that no really. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like one of the most popular video games at the moment is that Rainbow Six Siege. And this ticks so many of those boxes, It's like you've got your different roles or your different classes. And, I mean, like you say, it's a role-playing game. It's 100% a role-playing game. And the stories that you tell in a game of Ghost Ops are like a lot more interesting than just like when I first looked at this, I thought it would be just like essentially like a very tactical sort of war gamey kind of game. But it's not. There's like a lot of narrative stuff that can happen in a game of Ghost Ops, and that's what's super interesting to me. Is it's like it's the war. It's got all of the stuff that you'd want in like a war movie. So you have like the battle scenes, those battles, but then there's also, like you say, the camaraderie, the interpersonal relationships, and that sort of stuff that sort of crop up. That's in many ways more important than the combat. But one of the things that I think is super interesting about this game is that there's like a whole community that has sprung up around it of like super fans who write their own little materials for it. And just tell me a little bit about that and how you're involved in that and how that all came about.
Well, the community for Ghost Ops is really important because it does fuel an awful lot of the stuff that sort of come out from it. I mean, I've done like 3 expanded books for Ghost Ops, and that is principally based on what the community have either told me about or have written. So a lot of the stuff is very is written by the community members. So they kind of have sort of given me their home rules or things they've created and so forth and so on. Some of it's basically people saying, "Oh, you haven't got my special ops group for my country in it, Switzerland or Sweden or wherever." People are saying, "Oh, look, have you seen this from this newspaper?" And so I've kind of just, I remember one conversation people talk about, there was one, because a lot of the people in the group are military, they're active military or ex-military, which is great, right? So there's one guy who was talking about how, that day they'd been training with submachine guns and firing them at riot shields for a laugh, to see how the effect would be and how they bounce off the riot shields and stuff. And I thought, well, that's something I haven't got in the game. So I took that conversation and basically turned it into an expanded rule in one of the books. So the community is very important. The community is very active within what I do within Ghost Ops. A lot of the rules from Expanded are from the community or what community people have talked about. A lot of the groups with backgrounds and stuff have come from community members who want their country in the book. And I've always been quite happy to sort that out. I'm happy to oblige that. So, and it's great because it keeps the community talking and moving along and playing games and talking about it. And that's brilliant.
That's awesome. And so what is the current state of Ghost Ops? I mean, I know you put a hell of a lot of work into it initially, and there have been sort of like revisions and, like you say, extra source books and that sort of thing. Where is it sort of at the moment? Is it finished for now? Is there new stuff coming out? Is it something that you want to look into maybe down the line?
Okay, so basically at the moment, there's a few things happening, right? So the first thing that's happening is in September, the Ghost Ops Second Strike is being kickstarted, right? That's the second edition of Ghost Ops. Now, the second edition is basically an updated, renewed kind of version of a game based upon feedback from the community, right? So the basic rules of the game will stay the same. There'll be a few changes, but it won't actually affect a great deal of how people play the game, right? You'll still be able to play the game in the same way. And I wanted to do that because I wanted people to be able to still use the source material from the first edition, right? So all the source material for safe houses and drop boxes, the Africa source book, the South America source, all of those books will still be completely applicable for the second edition. You'll be able to use them completely. But I needed to do an update on it. And and I want to do it differently. So there's going to be a lot more backgrounds. There's going to be tiers of technological levels, so you can play it from 1940s up to future. I want to put all that elements into it, so people can play it at any period they wanted to. So a lot of people have said they wanted to play in the Second World War, or during the Cold War, or Vietnam, or what about the future? So all of that will be available within the new book. And I wanted to give different types of play styles as well. So you didn't just, because a lot of people didn't like playing as the ICO, didn't like having that. They wanted to play as something else, right? So within the new book, you'll be able to play as the ICO, you'll be able to play as private military contractors, you'll be able to play as black ops for your country, you'll be able to play as SWAT team members, you'll be able to play as agents, and there'll be different styles of play. So you can play as anything you want within that sphere. Right, but it'll all have pretty much the same premise of doing something. I mean, the private military contracts may be a little bit grey in a sense because they are a little bit grey. So that's basically what we're doing for that. But whilst that's being done, if it succeeds in its Kickstarter, which I'm hoping it will, whilst that's being done, when I'm making that, I'll still be releasing stuff for first edition because it'll still be relevant for second, right? So I can still continue to release stuff. So the next one I'll be releasing for Ghost Ops is going to be Dawn Red, which is basically a remake of Red Dawn. So you'll basically have two options. You'll be able to play as your ICO group who have been in a town which is a safe house, and that town is suddenly invaded by China or North Korea, whoever you want. It doesn't matter. There's no mentioned protagonist. They just turn up, right? Or you can play as kids within that town, and there'll be rules for that and new stuff. So you can actually play that like the film. You can actually play like the movie. So that's going to be called Dawn Red, and that's going to be the next thing we do. And then after that, there's going to be a few bits and pieces I'm going to. I always do a Christmas mission stuff. So
fantastic. So it sounds like there's a hell of a lot in the pipeline for Ghost Ops fans. That's fantastic. And I love the idea of doing like an expanded version of the rules, but that doesn't necessarily make the other stuff redundant, or it's just like more of the good stuff that people have come to love in the first edition. That's, I think, the right way to do things. Especially, if the game is working and people are having fun with it, no need to reinvent the wheel unnecessarily. So now we've spoken a little bit about Ghost Ops. Let's now shift away from the more realistic side of your oeuvre and look at some of the fantasy stuff, because I've noticed, like, with the exception of Ghost Ops and maybe one or two of your others, fantasy or fantasy elements are things that are sort of interwoven into pretty much all of your works. So what I want to talk about is a little bit about just the second edition of Delve and what that is in terms of how it's different from the original, and then we'll talk about some of your other projects that you have that fit more into that grimdark fantasy domain. So tell me a little bit about the second edition of Delve in like a nutshell.
Okay, so Delve is a bit more accessible than the first edition. The new edition is a bit more accessible. It's a bit more, people are going to recognize bits in it. It works on a D100 mechanic, which makes it very simple to play, which is cool. It's also got a very D&D sort of OSR aesthetic. So you're going to have like the leveling system of D&D kind of, and it's kind of got that whole kind of class system into it and things. And, the races, I think we call them species in the game. I don't know, I can't remember now, but maybe races or species. But it's kind of got a D100 mechanic with a kind of D&D. Somebody described it as the bastard child of Warhammer and D&D. And that kind of pretty much sums it up, really. It is kind of grim, but it's also kind of got that OSR look about it. That kind of people. I wanted to make something that was familiar, so when people open up, they went, "Oh yeah, okay, I get it, yeah." And I think it works like that. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people downloaded it, and people play it and stuff, which is great. But yeah, that's kind of, it differs quite a lot from the original in a sense that it doesn't have the whole, just dodge, don't fight sort of thing.
So is that something that you've removed from the second edition? Hey? Is that?
Yeah. None of that anymore. You just roll a D100 like you do in any, like you would in Warhammer or any other sort of D100 RuneQuest type sort of game. Which makes it, as I said, simple. The D100 mechanics probably one of the simplest and probably one of the better simple mechanics out there, really.
What's nice about the D100 thing is that it's like super easy to explain to non-gamers. It's like, rather than just an abstract number between 1 and 18 and you roll 3d6 and there's this and that, it's like, this is the percentage that you are able to do a certain thing. And yeah, to me, it's like one of the most logical mechanics to try and explain to non-gamers.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's something that Call of
Yeah, what I make
Cthulhu...
Delve. So.
No, sorry, carry on.
But I think Delve is also different in the sense that it has a setting now, where the original, I don't think it had a setting. It was just you going into caves and killing monsters. So it's very basic. The original Delve, I think the original Delve was only about 60 pages as well. But so yeah, you got a setting. So the whole game is based around the fact that you're shipwrecked on an island that you can't get off. It's kind of Lost meets. So it's kind of like so basically, if D&D, Warhammer, and Lost are a sort of menage a trois, they would it'd end up with some sort of weird hybrid thingy that kind of looked like. But anyway, so Lost was kind of, so you got this kind of fog around the island, you can't get off it. It doesn't exist on any maps and stuff. So you wake up on a beach after being shipwrecked, and you're kind of stuck on this island, and then there may be a way off it one day. Who knows? One day. I haven't decided if I'm going to do that, but I've got some things planned for Delve as well, some more stuff coming out for it. But,
fantastic. Okay, so this is definitely also things in the pipeline for Delve. So
yeah, totally, yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm thinking about the city of Narling is going to be hit next. I want to do a proper book for that though, so that may be something that will appear on Kickstarter at some point in the future, but not for a while yet.
Fantastic. Yeah. So now we're moving away from Delve, which is sort of a little OSR-y, a little more whimsical, and let's talk about one of your games that I love that's unapologetically dark, and that's League of Seekers. Tell me a little bit about League of Seekers and what the sort of origin story was for that game, and just give us this sort of elevator pitch.
Bloodborne. And watching things like Brotherhood of the Wolf, which is an awesome film. And it was a combination of those things where I kind of like that period of history. I do kind of like that whole thing. And I kind of want to do something that was a little bit, in some ways I want to do something that was a little bit blasphemous. And I've always been interested in the Templar Knights and what they did in the Middle East when they were over there, the Holy Land. The whole kind of mystery around those, and I think with League of Seekers, it kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of flex my historical conspiracy muscle a little bit in the histories I've kind of twisted some histories, and some histories are actually factual that people probably don't know about, but yeah, I've twisted some and added some others, and I think one person actually said it was interesting that when he was reading the history to the League of Seekers, he could actually Google people in it and actually discover whole new stories about people he never knew even existed, because I actually use real people in the history of it. So, and I've always been interested in things like Joan of Arc, and I've always, and Gilda Ray, and all those people who kind of existed and were a bit weird, So kind of League of Seekers got sprung from that, really. So I wanted to do something like that, but I wanted to kind of stick a kind of story behind it and an adventure and a role-playing around it, and kind of stealing ideas from Bloodborne kind of helped do that, really. And the Black Plague and all these other things. So having kind of it set in Europe was a big deal for me, because an awful lot of games are set in America and stuff. So having it set in Europe was kind of cool, and the colonies of America. So it was very much a European game. So yeah, that's kind of, it was kind of my Cthulhu type thing, I suppose. But yeah, there's lots of reasons I did it, and there's a lot of reasons, and I do love it. I think it's a great game. It was kind of ruined for me a little bit when I was making it. It was a very hard time for me, actually, because when the Kickstarter happened, and there was an awful lot of problems with the Kickstarter. People were having a real go about weird stuff that didn't really, for a role-playing game, didn't really kind of, it just did my head in, and that sort of marred it a little bit for the Kickstarter, even though it funded. And then after that, sort of, my mum passed away during me writing it, and I'm the only member of the family, so I had to do all the work. So I had to travel 200 miles, sort out the funeral and get rid of my mum's stuff and emptying everything out and all of that stuff whilst writing this thing. And I was telling people, but it's going to be slightly delayed. I'm sorry, but I've got to have to do all of this. And I got messages like, well, you should fucking grow up and get your ass back into work and stuff and stop being a baby about it. And I'm like, my mum's just died, you know what I mean? It's like, kind of, people, being really abusive about it. And it ruined the game for me a little bit. It ruined the whole process of making the game. So so League of Seekers, even though it was a game that I was really looking forward to making, I was really enjoying, kind of became a game I just didn't like anymore. And it's still out there, but I don't think I'll ever do anything for it beyond what it's already done.
I'm sorry to hear that it was such sorry to hear that it was such
well.
Yeah. A lot of terrible geeks out there, unfortunately. It's like you get the great ones, and then you get like the vocal minority, and they can be real cunts.
Basically.
Not to put too fine a point on it. So, League of Seekers. So you say that one's. Well, I kind of feel that, like, thematically, I feel there's. Maybe not even necessarily in terms of theme, but just in terms of feeling, I feel like your new game that you're working on, the Black Iron, it feels in some ways like a spiritual successor to me, anyway, to League of Seekers. Just in terms of the feeling I get from reading it, and I don't know if that's something intentional or if it's just something that you have in your soul that just like has to come out. This bloodborne sort of dark soul. Your dark souls. So tell me a little bit of now. I've had the pleasure of reading the sort of current version of Black Iron just as like a very preliminary proofread, and I can say that I really enjoyed the read through, and I think it's your best game by far, and I'm very excited to seeing it finish. So tell us a little bit about that for those of you for those viewers who don't necessarily know what it's all about.
Okay. So the Black Iron. So the Black Iron, I'm not really too sure how that came about, actually. I think I was kind of wanting to do something very dark. And I'd looked at, I've always been kind of interested in grimdark writing and stuff and novels and things. And I've always strived looking for sort of grimdark role-playing games. And even the ones that claim to be dark really are, grim. And even I love Warhammer, right? Don't get me wrong, I do like Warhammer, but Warhammer Fantasy, it's medieval, it's not dark, right? It's people have got disease and live in mud and stuff, but that's what happened in them days. It was medieval Europe, right? And there's chaos and stuff, but I wouldn't say it's very dark, right? Not really.
It's cartoony. It's cartoony.
Listen to things like black metal or anything like that. Yeah, exactly, right? And there's a few other games that come out that look dark, and I read them and I thought, well, is it dark? Or is it just me that I'm just too dark? And everything else just, I had a my upbringing is kind of a bit dark anyway, and my interests when I was younger were a lot darker. I come from a very kind of weird place anyway, but so I think I tend to see things darker. When somebody says dark, I expect them to be dark, and when they're not, I'm kind of disappointed, right? And some people might look at this and think, oh, that's really dark. And I think, well, you come from a bit of a sort of situation where you've never actually experienced anything bad, haven't you? Because that's not dark, you know what I mean? So I kind of wanted to do something that was dark. And I think that's where it sort of stemmed from. And I was thinking, how can I do this? And at the time, I've been kind of reading Talos Lanta, which is quite an interesting game because, it premises there's no elves in Talos Lanta, right? And it was the first role-playing game without elves in it or whatever, I don't know what. But anyway, it was a big thing at the time. And I was kind of reading Talos Lanta mainly for its system because I kind of like reading mechanics from role-playing games and see how they do things and stuff to see if there's anything worth nicking, really. And I was kind of sitting there thinking about it. And the whole idea of giants, and it was also reading a lot of Norse stuff at the time as well. I got really into the Norse stuff. I'd just been playing God of War, and I kind of got really into the whole Northern mythology. So, so basically the premise behind Black Iron is that thousands of years ago, giants controlled the planet, right? They rule the world. But they were kind of a bit twisted, a bit tainted. They got kind of a little bit blasé about it. They started, they created magic. So they started, destroying the earth by sucking out its energy in order to fuel their own magic and stuff. and basically, turned the seas black, and they turned the forests to dust and all, because they want to fuel their own magic, because they kind of got a bit big for their own boots, really. And as a giant, you can imagine how big their boots were, right? So these giants were kind of wandering around, sort of, sucking up all the power from the earth, and the old gods saw this and thought, hold on a second, this is not right, we've got to stop doing this. So they basically went to war against one another, right? So the gods came down and fought the giants, and the war went on for however millennia, and eventually the gods won. And the giants died, and the corpses were left to rot on the battlefield, and the gods that died, they also were left to rot on the battlefield, and the power from the giants, the blood that seeped into the earth, hit the roots of old trees that went deep underground. And because of their arcane magic, and because of their tainted blood, they created sort of like these buds on these roots that eventually became the elves. So the elves were made from the blood and the tainted magic of the giants who died, right? And so they grew up underground, right? They became the denizens of underground. And where the gods fell, their blood seeped into the earth, and they created humanity, right? So there's a little bit of a kind of a sort of almost a Genesis type thing there, right? And then we come across the elves. The elves come across the dwarves, who have been around for millions of years anyway, and have always lived underground and pretty much stayed out of the way of the giants. And the elves discovered the dwarves and tried to turn them into a slave race. They basically experimented on them. They used their magic on them. The elves are basically bastards, right? And they went around, they wiped the dwarves out, just because they could more than anything else, right? And then when the elves got bored, they thought, oh, wonder what's up top. So they ended up going to the top of the planet, and they came up to the surface world. And by this point, humanity had already, created, agriculture, and they built cities and stuff. And the elves thought, hold on a second, there's a whole new race here we can dominate. And they did, right? And so they basically enslaved the human race. The humans saw them as some kind of saviors, because they were so much more powerful. The elves had magic, the humans didn't, and all this sort of stuff. So they became kind of dominated by the elves. And for hundreds of years, the elves dominated the humans. They experimented on them. They treated them like shit. They enslaved them. They did pretty much horrible things to them, right? But the big secret was that humans could have magic. And when the humans discovered this, they realized that maybe they had the power to fight back, right, against their oppressors. And so they did it in secret. They built up armies in secret. They had blacksmiths working forever night, building arms and armor and stuff. And they grew these knights and stuff. And then they decided that at one point they would just all attack at once, right? And they attacked from inside the city. So all the slaves who lived inside, all the servants, all the people who were, under the elven control, attacked from within, basically, which took the elves by surprise completely and allowed them to take over these cities very quickly. So the humans basically gathered, and they went from city to city, taking over, gathering their army, building an army as they went, gathering people from villages and towns and stuff across, until they eventually came to the elven city, of the holy city, which is where the elves kind of did all their stuff, and their main witches and priests lived. And the elves are surrounded by the human army, which at this point was massive, right? And they sent out all their hybrids and their experimental monsters, the chimera and the corrupted ones. They sent all these out to fight. And these were the humans that they'd experimented on and twisted and converted and perverted, right? So they faced off against the knights, but the humans were just too powerful. There were just too many of them, right? And the elves realized that basically they were going to lose. So in a combined magical effort, they opened a gateway to another place, another realm. And before they left, they then splintered the moon, causing the Black Iron to break away from the moon and crash onto the planet in a hope to kill the human army and stuff, really, as their last ditch, screw you kind of to the humans, really, before they disappeared into this realm. And the elves buggered off. The humans, the Black Iron fell, split into thousands of pieces, caused massive earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and basically caused a nuclear winter on the planet. And this is where the game begins. There's one city left, which is called the Last City. All the other cities have been destroyed or whatever. The whole place is covered in snow and ice. It's a frozen wasteland. Thousands of refugees fled to the Last City as the last place refuge for humans. A lot of them then disappeared down underground to the dwarven cities, which they've discovered as the Black Iron fell and the world became the doorway to the underground to the dwarven swung open. And nobody knows why, because they've always been locked. Nobody had ever been able to open the door, and it just swung open. So the humans flooded down there, found the strongholds, discovered the dwarven cities. These were taken over by various families who are now becoming criminal families and stuff. The last city is run by guilds and by humans, and this is like 50 years afterwards is when the actual game starts. By this point, the Blackfort, which is the Mages Guild, have created these sunspires that holds the ice at bay and holds the corruption at bay. So the last city is kind of in this temperate zone in the north. And then beyond all this, you got the Pale, which is the ice lands. And the Pale is run by these people called the Bloodlords, who nobody knows who they are. They could be experimentations from the elves. They could be the elves that have become twisted. They could have been humans that became twisted. There is explanations for the book of each of the Bloodlords, but they're kind of like the Cthulhu mythos of Black Eye, basically. They're kind of the evil ones, the hard nuts. And then you've got all these corrupted monsters. You've got these different beasts that exist, all these different fanatics and cults. And you're basically a person within this kind of... So you're in a world where the world is actually trying to kill you as much as anything else is. And that's it. Really.
I think you've... Wow, I mean, even though I've read the book, I'm like captivated here. I love it. I think it's such a unique setting. And I know you and I are both big fans of post-apocalypse, and I think that you've like managed to fuse dark fantasy and post-apocalypse in a way that really works. With the Pale being this sort of like winter sort of wasteland of ice and snow, and just it's just a shitty place to be. But such a cool setting, such great lore. And one of the things I mentioned is that I think that the mechanisms are sort of easy enough for beginners to figure out, but there's enough room for depth and room for customization that like you sort of your grognards or your more traditional role-playing game enthusiasts could get involved. So give us a brief overview of how the game actually plays. What are the mechanics and what is sort of the some of the basic rules and how they work?
Okay, so the basic mechanic works on a basis you have skills and you have attributes, right? So you have 6 attributes and you have, I can't remember how many skills there is now, I think it's 15 or 16 skills. And the attributes range from 1 to 5. And the skills range from 1 dice to 5 dice. And how it basically works is that you, say if you've got, so if you want to use a skill, say you've got stealth, you've got a stealth of 3 dice, you roll 3 dice, you pick the highest, you keep the highest dice, and you add the attribute to it. And as long as you beat the target number, you're done it. And that's as simple as it is. It's that simple. If you roll, for example, if you roll 2 6s, you keep the 6, and the other 6 becomes a +1. So it becomes a 7, right? So you could roll 5 dice and get 4 6s, and that will be a 9, for example. So 6 + 3, 9, and then you add your attribute. So you can get as high as you want. And that's pretty much how it works. I put a few things in there, like, for example, the quality of your weapon affects how good you are at hitting things, right? And that's meant to indicate weight of the weapon, how a better quality weapon is going to be easier to use and not so weighted, a bit more balanced. So a very poor quality weapon will give you a -1 to hit or a -2, whereas a masterworks will give you a +1, +2 to hit. So you go out there, because there's no more blacksmiths. Not really. Most of the craftsmen are dead. There's no more, and forges and stuff are all in the villages and towns, all been destroyed. And some of your adventures may even just involve you going out to find an anvil and bringing it back, because they just don't have them. They don't have the technology to build them anymore. So there's no money. There's nobody minting money. Everybody's doing this kind of credit thing, or this sort of barter chip, which you kind of get to exchange things as you bring stuff in, right? So you find stuff. So the idea is that behind it, you can find weapons in the outside. You can bring them in, and then you can take them to a blacksmith, and they'll improve it or fix it or repair it, or take the hilt of that one and stick it on the blade of that one, and you've got a better sword. And that's the premise behind it. You don't have new swords made. You just improve the ones you've got until such times as
That also sort of ties into the whole post-apocalypse thing. Is like the people aren't there making new stuff. It's you find what you can and you shoehorn things together and MacGyver a situation, and that's kind of how it works. And that's something I also liked is like, you mentioned that you've got like sort of different levels of weapon. It's like you've delved in on like a granular level on certain things, but still the basic rules are nice and straightforward. You know, it's like there's depth there, but it doesn't overcomplicate the core mechanism. It's like, you know, very, very straightforward alterations to the dice rolls and that sort of thing. It's not like extra layers upon layers of convoluted mess. It's still nice and streamlined. Excellent. All right, so just one or two more things that I have here. We're not going to talk about any more games specifically. I just want to talk about you and the company and what a day. What does an average day in the life of James look like?
Right, on the average day, I kind of get up in the morning around about 9 or whatever time the cats wake me up. And straight away I'm on my computer looking, checking emails, going through all the social media, checking all the things. And I kind of do that whilst I'm eating my breakfast. And then once that's done, that's when I start. And that can go on from around 10 o'clock in the morning, 9:30, 10 o'clock, up until 5, 6 o'clock at night. I'll just be working on one project or another. Sometimes I'll work for even longer than that and go in the evening. But generally speaking, I try to stop around 6. So when I have my dinner, and then I settle down for the night and try to have a relax and stuff. And that's pretty much how I work 7 days a week.
Wow, the grind is real. Well, I respect the hell out of the grind, and I am obviously a big fan of your work. Anything else in the pipeline that you want to mention before we wrap it up? Any exciting things coming up?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be doing, we did Stranded, which was a Kickstarter that we've done that was successful. And Stranded is kind of the science fiction version of Delve, and it's going to be bigger. And basically what's going to happen is that you basically crash onto a planet. That's been blockaded, so you can't get off it. But it's going to be bigger. It's going to be a bigger world. So you've got a whole planet to wander around in, and you've got, you can be a robot or android, or you've got cybernetics. You've got all of that stuff, and it's going to kind of have that kind of Delve tongue-in-cheek kind of feel to it. It's going to be a little bit kind of, but again, I've listened to what people said about Delve, and I'm going to implement them as Stranded. So there's going to be things that people wanted in Delve added to Stranded. So again, it's sort of semi-community driven a little bit. It's always good. So that's coming out probably before December. It's meant to come out in December, but I imagine I'll probably get it done before then. Also, I've been working on The Ruin, which is a game that I first published back in 2016 as a quick start called The District, which never really went anywhere. Because I had so many other projects, they kind of got sort of stuck on the back burner. So I kind of handed it over to Max Caliber Games, who are kind of are now becoming part of us anyway, but we're going to be now be part of Feral Games anyway. So I've been kind of working a little bit on that, doing layout and stuff. And that's going to be post-apocalyptic, but it's going to be more realistic. There's no zombies or anything in it. It's going to be very realistic in the sense that it's more about survival and getting through life rather than shooting zombies and all that sort of stuff. There's going to be things in it that are a little bit weird and a bit odd. But yeah, it's going to be more. It's more based upon things like Book of Eli and The Road and films like that are kind of very much an influence on it rather than these more sort of zombie-type films. But so yeah, so there's that coming out. That'll be probably out September, October time. I'm also, I've got a few projects on the back burner. Talk about League of Seekers, actually. I'm doing this thing I've called the Onyx system, which is kind of a D10 system that I've kind of not developed as such, but kind of scrapped together from various things that I like. And I'm going to be doing a few little games for that. So League of Seekers, I can't remember what I called it now. Darkborn edition is coming out for that. So it's going to be kind of watered down League of Seekers. So it's going to have a background to it and a few other things. There's going to be no American colonies. There's going to be Paris and London. So there's going to be that. It's going to be a very simple system. It's going to have a few sort of elements of, but that's going to be a new League of Seekers. So I haven't really abandoned it completely. I've just changed its format. And there's also going to be a game called Grim Void, which is going to use the same. So these are all going to be little books I'm going to produce. Just knock them out there and see what happens. Grim Void, which is kind of based, it's sort of post-apocalyptic. So humanity lives in this massive pyramid in this desert. And they're basically fighting against this group called the Hive, which are just massive space insects that have invaded the planet, and they're trying to survive. There's that. And I'm also doing a fantasy game using that system called Big Fucking Axe, which is basically exactly what it is. It's a game where you play barbarians, and you're a big fucking axe. So yeah, there's a few little things I'm going to be knocking out for that. But they're all going to be little books. They're all going to use the same system, and I'm not rushing those because they're not Kickstarted or anything like that. They're just something I'm doing on the sideline, really.
Wonderful.
But I've got some artwork for it. The artwork's pretty nice for all of it. So yeah, I'm going to try a little bit something a bit different, to be a bit more sort of indie, if you like.
Fantastic. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time out of your, holy shit, busy schedule. When I said, when do you have in the pipeline? I didn't expect like 15 fucking books by the end of the year.
Yeah. I can probably think of a few more if I actually thought about it. Actually, there is. We've got a solo Ghost Ops, which is coming out in September, which is our first sort of like a fighting fantasy type, choose your own adventure type game where you play a stealth operative. That's going to be in 3 chapters in the book. So the first chapter is when you get there and you're working out what you're going to do, and then you infiltrate, and then you exfil at the end. So you're going to be kind of a Splinter Cell type fighting fantasy type game where you're playing these kind of stealth operatives going in there and kicking ass. And so that's going to be another thing we're going to be producing.
Wow.
Apart from that, I don't think there's anything else.
Well, I should hope not, because you need to find some time to sleep at some point.
You got cats, not much sleep.
No, I feel the cat pain. But I think on that note, I'd like to just thank you for taking the time to join me today, and I will let you get back to the grind, and I look forward to seeing what Feral Games comes up with in the future.
Thanks for having me. It's been great. It's always nice to chat, Gareth.
Cool. Take care. Cheers.